The Blade Runner by Alan E. Nourse. So before I get into what this book is about, I think I need to address the title of this one because there is a little bit of background and information how this ties to another book. Now, I'm no expert in this. I basically read over the Wikipedia entry for this book and it explains it pretty well, but basically what happened is in 1968, Philip K. Dick wrote this book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And as you can see, this is like the first US paperback of this one, and there's no other mention of any other name of this title. Now, in 1974, Alan E. Nourse wrote this book called The Bladerunner, and it was published in hardback in 1975. This edition from Ballantine came out in 1976, and it got some people thinking maybe we could write a movie about this one. And William S. Burroughs in 1979 wrote some sort of adaptation to this that never really took off or made it into a movie form. And so the project was just kind of shelved. Then in 1982, Ridley Scott decides to do a movie adaptation of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And while I love the title, that's probably not the best title to pitch to Hollywood. And so they were looking for a different title, and they came across this book and this screenplay about the Blade Runner. And Ridley Scott ended up buying out the rights and using the title Blade Runner for the movie that everyone, I'm sure, knows about. So because of all those reasons, this book here is kind of a curiosity. It's kind of a collector's item because there was really only one hardback edition ever published or printed and one paperback. And I did a book haul quite a while ago, and I had gotten a big lot of books on eBay, and I was going through them all. And when I got to this one, I just kind of went past it. I showed it, and some viewers mentioned that this was kind of collectible. And sure enough, I looked on eBay, and this book goes for $20 or $30, usually depending on the condition. And it kind of got my curiosity. And, you know, you can look up some reviews on Goodreads or whatnot. And this looked like a pretty interesting book, pretty well received. And it's also in this kind of subgenre of medical science fiction. This isn't like a huge aspect of most science fiction, but Alan E. Nourse was a full-fledged doctor, and so I believe he wrote many novels that kind of had medical themes to them. And we also have James White. He wrote tons of medical science fiction novels. And then also people like Michael Crichton and Greg Bear even kind of threw some medical aspects into some of their novels. So I was curious about this book. I thought I'd give a medical science fiction novel a shot. And overall, I'm glad I read this one. It was a real fast read. This was just over 200 pages. Parts of it read like a thriller, the way it was written and the pacing of the story. There was also some cyberpunk elements to parts of this one that were pretty intriguing. And overall, this is a pretty good book. But you know, to me it's probably like a 3-star, kind of middle of the road type book. But now let's get into like what this book is actually about. So like I mentioned earlier, this book was published in 1975. And I forget the exact date that Nourse was writing about, but it was a few decades into the future. And he envisioned this kind of dystopian world where overpopulation was really kind of taking the population to the brink, or to the planet to the brink. And they were trying to come up with some ways to control the population. And there had been some researchers who did some studies and published some papers, and they came up with this idea of using the medical industry for kind of a eugenics program. And what this entailed was you could get medical coverage for free if you agreed to be sterilized. So the idea was they used an example of diabetes. So if you had diabetes and you needed to go to the hospital for some reason, they would sterilize you first before they would treat you for whatever disease or illness you have. And they said that the way diabetes was spreading, that eventually like 3/4 of the population were going to get this disease, and this is in a way to keep that spread of those diabetic genes, going throughout the population. It's very drastic and extreme measures that's used for this. I couldn't imagine someone trying to pitch an idea like this. And in the novel, he even wrote about the riots that came up about this and how most of the population is really against this, but they don't have any other choice. The world, too, is under a lot of surveillance, and a lot of freedoms have been kind of taken away. There's even a group of people that are called the naturalists who have completely abandoned any kind of health care, and they just try to defeat it on their own. If they get sick, if they have any kind of illness, whatever, they just completely have given up on the medical industry. And, there is a lot of political unrest or civil unrest because of this and the way it's, implemented into society. And this book mostly just takes place in the United States. You're getting a glimpse of that, but you kind of get the idea that this is kind of a wider spread thing. So that's kind of the background of the setting that we're in. And what has happened because of this is there's a whole underground medical industry that has come up, because if someone can get at-home care and not have to go to a hospital and not have to get sterilized, then they're going to choose that over the alternative. And even the name of this book, The Bladerunner, that is one of these roles. Our main character, his name is Billy Gimp, and he is a Blade Runner. So what he does is he works with a doctor, and the doctor says, I'm going to be at this apartment building at such and such time, and I have to perform a tonsillectomy on some patient. And so then there's suppliers who will kind of put a kit together with all the things needed to perform this type of surgery. And then Billy, our Blade Runner, goes and grabs this kit, meets our doctor at this apartment when this surgery is going to take place. And they can kind of do this kind of hidden from the eye of the medical and the police state that's kind of imposing these rules. And so there's a lot of the story is about our main character, Billy. The story is actually broken up into 3 parts. So you get the first act is Billy, and you kind of get his background, and you learn more about everything that's going on and what blade running is. The middle part is with our doctor. You get a lot more information on him. You also come to find out there's some things going where they're training AI to learn how a doctor performs surgery, to eventually phase out real life human doctors and just have robots do it. And our doctor is against this, and he handles it in a very interesting way. That was one of my favorite parts of the book, really. This concept of this idea and kind of a pushback against this. And then the final act, everything kind of wraps up. And the main conflict, though, that's created in this novel is there's a flu that starts, and it seems not so bad to begin with. And it's actually called the Shanghai flu. And people are reluctant to go to the hospital, of course, because they're going to be sterilized. So most people say, I'm going to sit home and I'm going to tough this one out. Well, this flu ends up morphing into this really aggressive type of meningitis. It's very contagious, and it's really threatening to wipe out a massive part of the population. So that's kind of the conflict that really drives most of the plot, and it takes it to a pretty interesting conclusion. And, overall, I think this is like a pretty average book. It was entertaining. It was a very quick read. It did have that kind of thriller vibe to it. The worst thing for me about this is if you think through all of this stuff that's happening, a lot of it seems very implausible. It doesn't seem like this could really happen. And I don't want to go into details of it, but I had to kind of suspend my disbelief on it to just say, okay, this is what the author's given me. I'm going to go with it, and I'm going to accept that society is kind of reacting like this or whatnot. So, I don't know if it's one for everyone. I'm glad I read it because it's just kind of a interesting book. But next up, I'm reading The Goblin Reservation by Clifford Simic. I'm a little behind on reviews, so I'm already done with that one, and I'm going to be on Sean's channel Saturday to discuss that with probably a pretty large group of people. And then after that, I'm reading Startide Rising by David Brin, and this is going to be a buddy read with Joseph over at Joseph Reads Books. And that'll be the next review that comes out on my channel here in the near future. So just look for that one coming out next. And once again, thanks for watching.